Alexandre Pantoja's dominance over the flyweight division continues after submitting Kai Kara France in the third round at UFC 317. In this video, we are going to discuss if Pantoja has done enough to be considered the flyweight GOAT. Is he the new flyweight GOAT, or is it still Mighty Mouse? Now, this video is coming from not just a casual, but the perspective of somebody who is kind of biased towards Mighty Mouse. You know, Mighty Mouse was a fighter who, one of the first fighters I took interest in the UFC, watching his fights just because he was short like me and he would kick people's ass. I thought that was really really cool. You know, a lot of his finishes are, I mean, just his flying armbar finish is quite fucking amazing to this day. But in this video, we're gonna be very truthful. We're gonna be honest, and I'm gonna tell you why. I'll just be honest. I'm gonna tell you why I think Pantoja has reached that point. That I do think he might be the greatest flyweight we've seen now. And we're going to talk about the two different eras in which these fighters competed in and all that. But first, let's talk about the fight that went down last Saturday night. Kai Kara France and Alexandre Pantoja. I mean, what is there to say? Pure domination. I mean, from the first couple seconds of the fight, it almost seemed like the fight was going to end within the first 15 seconds because Pantoja was just fucking viciously, the cannibal does what he always does, marches them down in the very beginning of round one, as he typically does, just kicking the shit out of Kai Kara France's legs and going for takedowns very early in the fight. Something we saw very immediately in this fight was the power difference. You know, Kai Kara France is known for his flyweight power. That didn't seem to be. There seemed to be a big power difference, and it seemed Pantoja is a much harder hitter, got more of a reaction every shot he threw at Kai Kara France. Now, within the first 15 seconds, probably less than 15 seconds, Kai Kara France gets a takedown. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Pantoja gets a takedown on Kai Kara France. And, you know, that has to be kind of embarrassing because you probably would assume that City Kickboxing, Kai Kara France, their whole training camp was to make sure to not get in this position, to make sure that Pantoja doesn't get you, doesn't get your back, because that's obviously, in the build up to this fight, it was very obvious Kai needs to keep this fight on the feet. You know, he would have more success on the feet. There's no way he's going to submit Pantoja. He's not going to be able to do much. And we saw such a physicality difference. Like in the clinch and in the grappling, Pantoja just fucked this dude up, ragdolled him. Um, Now, early in the fight, Pantoja almost finished it with a body triangle. Um, Around what? Sorry, I'm so sorry. He almost finished it with an arm triangle. I'm so sorry for that. Now, Kai Kara France's low output, you know, made it so that it was easier for Pantoja to pretty much walk through him in this fight, you know, because within the first 15 seconds, not only was there the fear of Pantoja's power, but the fear of Pantoja's takedowns and his physicality. Now, I'm so sorry. Kai Kara France's shots did zero damage to Pantoja in this fight. Um, it's very important to note that. I, I mean, it was just so weird because this in this build up to this fight, you know, Kai Kara France is marketed as the hardest hit, one of the hardest hitters in flyweight. We really didn't see that tonight. Like none of his shots seemed like they were doing anything to Pantoja. Now, Pantoja is in a fantastic spot in his career. Four title defenses since 2023. His fight win streak is now at 8. Um, his journey is quite amazing. You know, it's very well known, his journey. Up until I think it was like 2 years before he became champion. It wasn't until he had submitted Brandon Royval the first time they fought, he got a 50K bonus and was able to quit his job as an Uber Eats driver. This was back in August of 2021. So his journey is just fucking amazing. Pantoja, what he's gone through, what he's accomplished, what he's overcome. Now, we're going to talk about how this guy right here, Mighty Mouse, how if Pantoja, you know, if there's anyone who can rival Pantoja for who's the greatest flyweight of all time, it's obviously there's only one other person. It's Mighty Mouse, and it's because of this right here. This list of 11 title defenses. Now, I'm gonna bring up something that most MMA YouTubers have brought up already, which is that many of these wins are against nobodies. Let's just be fucking honest. A lot of these guys are nobodies, and the ones who are well known, it, not too remembered, are they? Now, in if when I look at this entire list of fighters, I'm sorry for continuing to stutter, but when I look at this entire list of fighters, there are some obviously really impressive title defenses. Obviously, there is Jose Benavidez, a guy who was known for losing title shots. There's him. There's John Dodson twice. That's pretty good. Joseph Benavidez. So we already said Joseph Benavidez, but there's him twice. Henry Cejudo, Kyogi Horiguchi. That's really good. And let's be honest, that's kind of the most impressive it gets out of all these title defenses. Those three opponents in particular are the most impressive. Now, when we compare, this is Alexandre Pantoja's. These are his fights since winning the belt against Brandon Moreno and his title defenses. We're gonna break down each and every one of them. Now, as we see here, if you look at the statistics in every fight, when it comes to takedowns, shots landed, Pantoja wins a lot of these with both the amount of strikes he throws and his takedowns. Now, when he first got the belt, instant classic, by the way, this was a great win. This fight alone and this win. Now, of course, this was the third time he had beaten Brandon Moreno, technically, but this version of Brandon Moreno beating him like this, when Brandon Moreno had all this hype behind him, was really, popping off. Let's be honest. He was a superstar. He was really growing in popularity in Mexico and amongst the Mexican American fans. Now, this was one of the best flyweight title fights ever. And what Pantoja did to him was nothing short of spectacular. I mean, even though Brandon Moreno was loaded, throwing way more, seemed like he connected more with volume, Pantoja fucked him up, walked him down, and continued, had no respect for Brandon Moreno's power and kept walking him down, dropping him twice, I believe, in the entire fight. This win is very impressive. To start off your title run like this, very impressive. Now, his first title defense, also incredibly impressive. Brandon Royval is not a fucking pushover. We know this. Anyone who's not a casual can tell you this. Now, obviously, even though I understand that Royval does have a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he has quite a few submission wins in the UFC. He's not the best defending at grappling, and that really showed against Pantoja. Now, I know Pantoja really is that good, and I give him credit for that. But, Pantoja only went for one submission attempt out of 8 takedowns in that fight. Now, I still think this win is fantastic and has aged really well because of what Brandon Royval has done since then. Because, again, that's a big thing for me. Brandon Moreno hasn't actually been as impressive since his fight to Pantoja. This is actually, might be even more impressive than Brandon Moreno because Royval went to go on to beat Moreno right after that in Mexico. An amazing win, by the way, to beat Brandon Moreno in Mexico, and then also to be the first person to beat Tatsuro Tairo. I mean, he took his popped his cherry. And then you add that in with, even though he lost to Joshua Van last Saturday night, that was a barn burner. There's nothing to be ashamed of with a performance like that, taking on a dangerous up-and-coming contender, the future of the division. So, I mean, at least who some people deem as the future of the division, Joshua Van. So, beating Brandon Royval, probably his most impressive title defense in my opinion so far. Really is his most impressive title defense to do that to Brandon Royval and to, just grapple fuck and hold him on the ground like that and to dominate him and not let him get out. Royval is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Fantastic win. Now, this is where it gets iffy. The second title defense, Steve Erceg. Now, I know quite a few people like Steve Erceg. A lot of Australian fans like Steve Erceg. But let's be honest. He's not that elite. He's good. He's a good fighter. He's fun to watch. He's not that elite. And Pantoja had a competitive fight against him. To the point where there were quite a few fans who were saying that could have gone Steve Erceg's way. Now, when I rewatched that fight, I think it was 2-2 going into the 5th. Pantoja did enough to win it. I think Pantoja just won that fight. But nonetheless, it was a close fight against a guy who's now on a 2-fight losing streak since this fight. got chinned against Kai Kara France, uh, got unfairly rewarded like a main event against Brandon Moreno in Mexico, got this massive spot on a massive card unfairly and lost that by decision, even though it was competitive. Still lost, didn't really offer much to Brandon Moreno, in my opinion, in that fight. So, not the most impressive title defense, in my opinion. Nor, at the same time, I also know that people were hyping up, Urseg striking and all that. He's not that known for it. He had, he did have that fantastic knockout. But as we saw against Moreno and Kai Kara France, this guy is not an elite striker. Like he was, like some people were saying he was. And before the Pantoja fight, he's not that guy. I like Steve Urseg, but he's not that guy, okay? I hate to say it. Now, Kai Asakura, do I really even have to explain myself this much? Kai Asakura was, what was he, 23, 24? And making his UFC debut at 23, 24 against Pantoja, the reigning flyweight champion. Now, Asakura did better than I actually thought he was going to do. But nonetheless, he's making his UFC debut. Kai Asakura is kind of frustrating this one because it's kind of a wait and see. He's only had one fight in the UFC, and it was against Pantoja. And yeah, he had that cool knee and stuff, but I need to see more fights, and I need to see him have more time in the octagon to really judge if this was an elite title defense or not. He's a star in Ryzen, yeah, but the rule set is completely different in Ryzen. How do I know he's going to translate that well? Now, of course, as I said before, there was that fantastic knee up the middle in round 1, but that was his most competitive moment. After that, pure domination by Pantoja, but nonetheless, this is not a well-rounded title defense. This is not like the most well-rounded fighter to be defending your title against. So, as we've seen before, I think there's one really, really elite title defense against Brandon Royval, and then two, not as much. Very dangerous guys, Asakura, Steve Ursig, very dangerous. Just not as impressive as Royval or, Moreno. Now, most recently, I'm sorry to do this to all the New Zealand City kickboxing fans. I'm sure this picture is devastating. Now, beating Kai Kara France, the way he did, very impressive, really good. Now, of course, Kai Kara France is not the most well-rounded. He's not a very good grappler. He's not a submission guy. I don't know if he's won by submission. I think maybe he has in the past. But Kai Kara France is not the most well-rounded. And it's from the first time that they fought in 2016 on The Ultimate Fighter, Pantoja clearly got better. And Kai Kara France, I don't know what to say. You would think he would have a better game plan and be better by this point years later. But he wasn't. In fact, I'm willing to argue that Saturday night might have been more devastating for Kai Kara France's career than Charles Oliveira. Because with Charles Oliveira, he's already an established champion. A lot of people weren't even really expecting him to win against Ilia Topuria, if we're going to be honest. I mean, if you studied their fight film, you would know Ilia Topuria was going to win that fight. But Kai Kara France, on the other hand, was like, there were some people, I know not every MMA, aside from Kenny Okoye, but there were quite a few people legitimately thinking he was going to come in with a better game plan and learn from his previous mistakes. Turns out, no. In fact, he barely had a competitive moment in that entire fight. Now, who is next for Pantoja? Now, before I talk about who is next, I do want to say one thing. After we looked at those title defenses and who's who, I do think that Pantoja, this is going to sound very biased. I think Pantoja is tied with Mighty Mouse right now when it comes to the GOAT of the flyweight division, which is why I think Pantoja is one title defense win away from being the GOAT of the flyweight division. Now, these two fighters I have up here, I understand that Pantoja's beaten Manel Kape. All right, I also know that Manel Kape is so unreliable and so unprofessional that I don't even care if he gets his title shot at this point. All right, you can't even expect fucking Manel Kape to show up on fight night or to make weight without eating fucking fried octopus and butter. Okay? Now, Muhammad Mokaev. Obviously, the UFC is mad at him right now, and they're going through some bullshit. But bring him back in, which I'm hoping could happen. I'm really hoping it's going to happen. Bring Muhammad Mokaev back into the UFC and give him a title shot against Pantoja. That would be so impressive. Beating Muhammad Mokaev would be an elite win, and it would for sure put him in GOAT status. For me, at least. I know many of you already put Pantoja as the flyweight GOAT. I think beating the undefeated Muhammad Mokaev would make him the GOAT of the flyweight division. All right, I want to thank all of you guys for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking. Please tell me if you think that Pantoja is the GOAT of the flyweight division. Do you think that Mighty Mouse is still the GOAT of the flyweight division? And who do you want to see Pantoja defend his title against next? Do you want to see a rematch with him and Manel Kape? Do you want to see Muhammad Mokaev get brought back to the UFC and take him on in the octagon? Or do you want to see, some boring shit like fucking Amir Albazi or some boring flyweight to stink up the event? All right, tell me what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching.